36 months ago, Cambie Street Corridor was one of the hottest marketplaces in pre-sale in the Lower Mainland. Today, we're going to jump into where it's currently at and where we think it's going to go in the future. This is a rockstar market analyst that's joining me, Gardy McDonald. And today, we're going to talk about everything Cambie Street. So let's go into it. I'm going to give a few hints. First, we're going to start off with an 8-year retrospective. So we're going to wind the clock back and we're going to look from 2012 to current date. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about pre-sale and resale marketplace of where we're at today. And then we're also going to jump into potential inventory and upcoming supply along the corridor. Now, Gardy, we don't ask for much, right?
No, we don't.
No, I agree with you, Gardy. We don't ask for much. But we are going to ask you to click that subscription button down below. Give us a like or a thumbs up. The reason being is that gives you unparalleled access to incredible content. First and foremost, you get access to the Daily Newswire. This is a roundup of the hottest real estate topics that are trending in our space. You get access to our pre-sale pulse. This is a monthly subscription. This is incredible because it's going to keep you on top of everything that's happening in the pre-sale market. And then of course, and maybe potentially the most important, gives you unparalleled access to our upcoming projects. This puts you in the driver's seat if you're looking for a new home. I also want to say thank you to Urban Analytics and Altus for the incredible data that those providers are able to offer. So with all that out the door, Gardy, why don't we kick this off?
Yeah, Ryan. So over the past 8 years, we've seen 41 both concrete and wood frame projects come to the Cambie corridor. This equates to about 5 projects per year over that 8-year period. In terms of sales, we've seen about 100 pre-sales per quarter over that 8-year period, which equates to roughly 400 pre-sales per year along Cambie corridor, both wood frame and concrete product.
Now, it's fascinating because I'm thinking back to 2012, right? And I recall one of the first programs that come with the OCP was, of course, Elizabeth. And I remember being in the boardroom with Rob McCarthy and Michael Brown. And both of those gentlemen's beliefs was that Cambie Street would have a little bit of room to move up in price per square foot.
Just a little?
Just a little bit. And back in 2012, you'll recall that price per square foot was sitting at $630 per square foot. And that was pushing at the time. You fast forward now 8 years, and it's just incredible to see the growth that we've seen out of that marketplace.
And you're absolutely right, Ryan. And when we look at a more recent launch along Cambie corridor, we see Voice, which launched in August 2020 by Fourfield Development Group. That project was at $1,450 price per square foot, which is more than double that $640 that you plugged about 8 years ago.
One of the things to note, though, is that they've gone with a very compact unit mix. What's fantastic, though, is that we've seen absorption out of the gates. I think the Key's done a very good job of trying to push really hard into the marketplace at a time where many are pulling back. What's also nice is that it's one of those early indicators, and so far it feels like that marketplace is really returning to Cambie Street. It was relatively stagnant over a period of time. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later in today's session, but love to see transaction volume and the price per square foot that's being generated from that program.
And over those past 8 years, we've seen 2,800 units of both concrete and wood frame condominiums come to market. And when you reference the pricing of 2014, around $600 or $700 a square foot, it's incredible to see the appreciation that we have over the past 3 or 4 years.
There's also been a significant change between how wood frames appreciated in that time frame relative to concrete. And some of this is tied back to potentially location on Cambie Street of where those offerings were. But we think actually a more significant part of that is actually tied to potentially buyer demographics. Right? When we look at great programs like Amber, more recently by Aragon, seeing what they're able to drive, really catering towards more of a younger buyer, wood frame bases, view vantage points. But then we compare that to some of the other great platforms that have also found their way onto Cambie Street, like Cressy's Chelsea, which arguably is one of the highest price per square foot achieved on the Cambie Street corridor, but also one of the more luxurious buildings in arguably the best spot within Cambie Street.
Yes. And when we talk about those 2,800 units that have either sold out or are currently on the market, we see that 1,500 of those units have already completed. When we look at the past 6 quarters, you can see there's a high volume of completions that are coming online, which will be interesting as we move forward and talk about the upcoming supply along the corridor.
And what's really interesting about that is that of the 2,800 doors that have either sold or in the process of actively selling, approximately 1,500 of them have completed. So that means another 1,300 are completing within the next 12 to 16 months. And that's a volume level that Cambie Street has not experienced up until now. What I also think it's really, really important to notice, though, is that when we think about the schedule of delivered units looking forward, starting around Q1 of 2022, all the way through to basically Q4 of 2024, we're seeing a very, very small number of new homes being delivered. And that's a function of 2 things. One, the mass amount of building that happened along Cambie Street in the latter parts of 2016, 2017, and 2018. And now many of those homes are up for completion. But then also the lack of construction of new housing starts that have occurred from 2018 to 2019. So of course, we're seeing an influx of completions that happen over the next 14 months. But for the most part, our inventory levels for new homes drops off a cliff starting at the end of 2021. And that's going to be really interesting how that plays in with the resale values.
And to build off that, those completions are really showing their head in the MLS resale stats. We used to hover around 550 active listings along Cambie corridor, whereas in the last 2 to 3 years, with those heavy amount of completions, we've seen active inventory eclipse 1,100 units, whereas sales have stayed around 140 sales per year, which has not kept up with those completions.
So 140 sales per year, we're talking between 10 and 15 transactions per month right now. And you layer in the incredible supply of inventory that we can expect over the next 12 months. And it's very likely that 1,100 listings that you're speaking about today can quickly double if we're continuing to see steady demand or that supply of transaction hovering between that 120 and 140 per year. Now, Gardy, I want to spend just a few moments touching on sales to listings ratio. We know that this is a very powerful metric. It's an easy way for us to understand both the resale and the pre-sale health of this marketplace. Let's jump into what the numbers are showing us today.
When we take a look at the aggregate sales to listing ratio for Cambie, South Cambie, and Oakridge, we can see that as the market dropped off around Q3, Q4 2018, that our sales to listing ratio dropped below that 12% threshold that we consider we're now in buyer's market territory. Previously, in the hot market of 2016-17, the sales to listing ratio peaked up to 30-40%, which put us into great seller's market territory and led to great price appreciation. But over the past 2 to 3 years, we've seen stagnant activity and price depreciation.
You know, Cambie Street, as of recent, has actually been one of the more challenged sales to listing ratios in all of Metro Vancouver. Now, that goes hand in hand, though, with some of the information that we just shared around primary demographics and also thinking about the upcoming supply that we feel is waiting in the wind, looking for the right opportunity. All right, so Gardy, we have 32 projects currently in the development process, right? This means 32 projects likely in an opportunity to begin their sales programs at some point in the next 3 to 4 years, provided that we have the right economic conditions for it. What do you think that that means for Cambie Street?
Well, it means that over the next sort of 6 to 8 years, we have 7,600 units coming to market. 5,600 of those units, or 74%, are coming to market via 4 master plan communities.
Right, so what you're talking about there, you mean we have Oakridge, of course, right? And an incredible offering there with Quadreal and West Bank. Of course, we have Cambie Gardens. This is already well underway, and Ani's done a fantastic job of really pushing that marketplace up. We have the Heatherlands, and of course, we have the Langara Gardens. These are obviously very, very large master plans, some of the biggest that we have in Metro Vancouver.
And when you take a look at the remaining projects, we have about 28 sort of single building projects that'll bring 2,000 units to market. Of course, there's some issues with the price they paid for the land and sales and marketing strategy, but we expect these units to come to market definitely within the next decade.
Right, so when you think about master plan communities, you generally think that it's 1 to 2 towers per year. So of any one of those active programs, that's anywhere from 200 to 400 doors in a very stable marketplace. And then the assumption is out of those 2,000 doors, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 60% will actually make it through because they have good land buys. They're with vendors that have the expertise and the knowledge to be able to get the density out of the ground. And then also, of course, the price per square foot conditions for them to be able to thrive and hit pre-sale tests. So another leading indicator that we like to look at is all about that sales to listing ratio. We just mentioned that that's a powerful health metric for any market. The alternative that we consider, of course, is what is the percentage of pre-sale price, so that's pre-sale sold price to resale sold price, right? And in any given market, this is an important comparison note because what we're really talking about is how close is pre-sale pricing to resale pricing. And I think what's interesting is that when we look at a variety of markets across the Lower Mainland and compare how they stack up, Cambie is certainly sitting as an outlier today.
And when you look at a market that's usually considered luxury, such as downtown Vancouver, we can see that the delta is only about 12%, whereas Cambie has a 20% delta, which is almost double. And then if we compare that to 2 other markets with substantial levels of development, Richmond and Burquitlam, we can see these are single-digit deltas, with Burquitlam being one of the strongest markets in the Lower Mainland.
Right. I mean, interesting with Burquitlam, potentially one of the more resilient marketplaces that we've seen. The transaction volume on resale over the past 4 months has been very, very strong. And that pales in comparison to what Cambie has been able to yield, which again is anywhere from like 12 to 15 transactions. But you have to remember that demographics are everything right now, right? And when we look at the primary buyers of some of the marketplaces that are a little bit further east, outside of the downtown core, that tends to be more local driven, right? More millennial driven. Whereas opportunities that are like closer to the core, those tend to hail from a very different demographic type that at this point in time feels like they're taking their time, making sure that it's the right moment for them to begin to invest back inside the marketplace. So Gardy, let's wrap this and let's think about maybe the 4 big takeaways or the 4 big trends that we're noticing from everything that we've learned about Cambie Street over the past few days. I think the first one is market caps, right? The average number of transactions that we're seeing coming out of that corridor. Right now it seems to be hovering somewhere between 525 and 550 units per year. About 100 to 120 of those are resale. And in the past, the bulk of them have been made up by pre-sale. Now, over the last 12 to 18 months, there has not been the inventory to be able to account for that type of demand. So the big question that we're wondering is that demand growing like we've seen in every other part of the marketplace? And is it looking for the right moment to seize? And it feels like when we think about everything that the world is experiencing today, we think about tourism, we think about YVR, and certainly the health overseas and the demand that that places potentially on safe havens like Vancouver. We think that there's a real opportunity for maybe that demand to build and release at some point throughout the early parts of next year.
The next key insight is completions. So we expect 90% of the 2,800 units that have already sold or are actively selling along Cambie corridor to complete in the next 12 to 14 months. And of course, there's going to be some closing delays, potential closing delays. But what we really want to highlight is that most of the product that is already sold will complete, and then there will be a gap moving forward in completions.
So we're going to pay really close attention then to that listing volume that currently sits in the market. As we reviewed a little bit earlier, that number is just over 1,100 units at any one given time throughout the course of the year. Our expectation is that that's going to continue to rise, especially considering that demand levels stay constant. I think the next 2 key points are going to be our price per square foot spread and of course our current resale price per square foot. So price per square foot spread, that's that number that we were talking about previous, and there's 2 ways to read this. The optimistic way, and the way that we feel is most likely the outcome of the future, is all about thinking about Cambie Street at its bottom today, right? We've had buyer demand essentially dry up, primarily because of our target demographics and all of the challenges that are associated with that demographic being able to purchase Canadian real estate. The second piece, of course, is all about current resale values. They're sitting at around $1,150 per square foot today. And what's really, really interesting about this is that all of the land that's purchased up and down Cambie, in all 3 phases of the core, the majority of that land cannot be taken to market and cannot be developed unless the price per square foot volumes sit somewhere between $1,350 or higher. And I think the challenge will be to understand how do we make up that spread. And we think about the notion that all of our inventory after Q4 of 2021, for the most part, dries up. It's highly likely that we're going to continue to see price escalation up and down the core, primarily because we just don't have the supply of new homes to keep up with that steady demand of 550 transactions we've traditionally seen.
And to build off that, we talked about price escalation earlier, and the interesting thing to note is that anybody who bought a condominium along Cambie corridor during pre-sale of 2017 or 18 cannot sell their condo for less than that purchase price. Therefore, we do see the current pricing being the bottom of the market, just given the fact that these purchasers want to hold on and get a profit out of their unit if they are willing to sell.
Right. So that concludes our Cambie Street Market Snapshot. And as always, all of the information that we've shared with you today is all available below. So check those links out. Gardy, it's been obviously a treat. We've enjoyed the time and looking forward to any feedback. So if you think that we missed something, if you think that we can do something better, we want that feedback. We want to hear about it. So please do not hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ryan. It was really great to join you today and discuss Cambie corridor, which is one of the more interesting and intricate markets in our marketplace.